Once again, everyone, thanks so much for tuning in today for today's webinar with CPC Strategy and R3 Consulting. We're going to get started, so if you guys could turn off any audio, that would be great right now. So the purpose of today's webinar is to learn how to optimize product information management, or PIM, and today we're featuring speakers from R3 Consulting and CPC Strategy. All right, a little bit about CPC Strategy real quick before we get started. So here at CPC Strategy, we're a digital marketing agency with a pretty heavy focus on retail search. What that means is that we understand how retail search works, and we harness that for sellers, such as yourself, on major sales channels, and those include Google, Amazon, Bing, and some of those shopping channels like Shopzilla. We help retailers, which are you, leverage and optimize your search presence, so where you are on those engines, to get more clicks and conversions and basically do well on search, get a higher ROI, and optimize your ad spend. More importantly, we put relevant retailer products, so your products, in front of customers who are ready to buy. So more specific to what they're looking to find, what they're looking to purchase right when they're looking for it. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started on the webinar today. As I mentioned earlier, we will be recording this webinar. So if you have to pop out, if you have a meeting, a call, we will be recording this webinar. We will be sending that webinar recording email to all registrants, so you're welcome to forward that as well. And so just keep an eye out for that in your inbox. That will be coming from me, and my name is Mary Weinstein, and that will be coming from mary@cpcstrategy.com. I'll be driving the webinar today, so if you have any logistic problems or questions that are not applicable to this webinar, feel free to reach out to me. We will be featuring a Q&A following this presentation, and that will feature all three of our speakers, Heather, Stephen, and Rick, so you'll be able to leverage their expertise across PIM, e-commerce, Google, Amazon. Any questions you have, they'll be happy to answer them within the time constraints. And even if you have questions that are in addition to those, we'll be happy to forward those and kind of bolster a conversation there. And just to reiterate that, throughout the presentation, if you have a question, please feel free to use the chat box. I'll be surfing those, and I'll be pushing those to the presenters during the Q&A section following the presentation. Real quickly about our speakers, we are featuring Heather Rains and Stephen Rogers from R3 Consulting. Combined, they have over 38 years of retail experience, so we're really leveraging some amazing experience here today. And we also have Rick Bacchus joining on the call, who is our CEO and has been working with both Google and product information from the start of CPC Strategy, so has an extensive amount of expertise in that arena as well. All right, so just to real quickly touch on PIM before I pass it off to Stephen and Heather. So PIM is really important and I think super underutilized and underrepresented. PIM is integral for sellers on more than one channel. So if you're selling on Amazon, Google, or if you have a brick and mortar presence, it's probably important that you consider, analyze, and optimize PIM. Product information management, whether that's through technology or you're manually doing it, it's really one of those levers, one of those keys that's going to be a successful element to your e-commerce strategy moving into 2015. So today we're going to be talking about PIM, obviously. What is it about? Why is it important? Why is it key for e-commerce in 2015? And how you can leverage your existing data to increase conversion. Again, our speakers today are Heather and Stephen. Heather has extensive e-commerce and retail experience with an emphasis on strategy and planning. So she specifically has 13 years of experience in this arena and has some really awesome talking points. Stephen has spent an equally significant amount of time managing retail and working with business processes. So they're going to be sharing their coupled knowledge today and talking about PIM and why you should do it, if it's applicable to your store, and just some optimizations there. And so I'm just going to switch over to Stephen and Heather.
Thank you, Mary, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm Heather Raines, and I'm here with Steve Rogers, and we're excited to be guest speakers today to talk about the Product Information Management Systems, otherwise known as PIMs. Today we're going to try to explain the role of a PIM, discuss the growing importance it has in a retail organization, highlight some of the direct and indirect benefits of a PIM, and lastly provide some insight as to what you should know and consider when implementing a PIM solution. So let's jump right in and get started. PIM is of growing importance because it manages one of the most critical elements of online and omni-channel business, product content. It's evident that product content and product data has increased for retailers, suppliers, and manufacturers as product content. Many businesses are managing higher SKU counts, more frequent SKU turnovers and transitions. They need to record and store more data, and that data needs to be consistent and available across the enterprise. Marketing mediums and customer touch points are expanding, and customers are demanding more product information before making a purchase. There's also a growing desire and a need for international expansion for many businesses, but these complexities that go along with it make it a challenging venue to tackle. And of course, as needs increase and change, sometimes rapidly, there's a strong desire for flexibility to allow for easier scaling and adaptation. These are all motivating factors making PIM a frequent topic of discussion. The definition of what is product content has evolved tremendously over the last 10 to 15 years, due significantly to the evolution of e-commerce and the explosive technological advancement of commerce sales and operational systems. The number of places that product data and content is shared, communicated, and leveraged has grown with the expanded use of handheld scanners in fulfillment and distribution warehouses, more in-store displays, kiosks, wireless POS devices, and an expansion of selling and marketing across print catalogs, online stores, and of course mobile apps. Accurate product data that is quickly and easily set up, maintained, and referenced is critical to both internal and external customers of the organization. The scope of what is considered basic product information has expanded as all these tools and digital sales channels expand with their functionality and capabilities. What classifies as product content and product data has expanded well beyond what most item master and core merchandising systems were designed to handle. Item masters and core merchandising systems historically supplied basic product information to point of sale and operational systems, but they didn't really address the added product data and product content needs of e-commerce. PIMs were originally focused on addressing those e-commerce needs. However, the role of a PIM continues to grow as PIM solutions are now leveraged across the enterprise to supply a universal view of all product data. So what is a PIM? When implemented, PIMs generally become the system of record for all product data. PIMs are used to store core product data such as product numbers and multiple product descriptions that are needed for reporting, store POS registers, product catalogs, and online product pages. They can also be used to house attributes, dimensions, business rules that are required to run the now more complex warehouse management systems, inventory systems, and e-commerce sites. Also, PIMs are the centralized data repository for many of the metrics and attributes that drive the omni-channel experience, as well as things like product offerings across multiple channels, supplier profile information, price, restrictions, etc. It can also be used to help with the use of multi-language websites. PIMs typically force better data quality and data cleansing on the front end, such as ensuring data in fields are formatted correctly before passing to other systems. To quote Forrester, PIMs provide the governance and process orchestration tools needed to manage unique product content needs for individual channel partners, as well as tools to syndicate out product content in the required format and specifications defined in downstream channel partner trading agreements. Because PIMs are usually the central repository for all things product data related, they typically feed the product information to other systems like WMS, website platforms, call center interface, POS store registers, CMS, CRM, and also MDM. Because PIM feeds so many other systems, they normally store more product-related information than any other single system. They don't necessarily replace any of these other systems. They just improve and make more efficient the creation and management processes of the product-related data that's found in each of them. The integration of a PIM to other systems is usually a one-way data flow. PIMs typically push data out to other systems but don't normally receive data back from those systems. Many times PIM is confused with a master data management solution. There are also some solution providers that have created hybrid type solutions in which some of the capabilities blur the lines between a PIM and an MDM, and that makes a distinction between the two confusing. To differentiate, think of a PIM as a user-friendly tool for the business user to gather and organize product information that will be going out to a consumer of the information, many times an end product consumer. An MDM is more an IT tool that manages the collection of everything related to customers, product, suppliers, partners, etc., and organizes and links all of that data, then communicates the normalized linked data back out to other systems and reporting tools. MDMs simply validate the single version of truth for product data and extended data and synchronize that truth with the applications that manage these dependent upstream and downstream processes. Some PIMs can pick up the role of an MDM when an MDM is absent, but it's not meant to replace an MDM and vice versa.
Most item masters and merchandising systems, they focus on housing and maintaining the core product data. They also store minor amounts of other product data, but the scope of that data that's able to be stored, as well as the flexibility to change or modify the data structures and formats, is extremely limited. PIMs typically have greater capabilities to manage a vast array of data types and much more flexibility to expand or change the data being stored as needs develop or change. Much like the diagram shown, the sphere of product data has evolved over time from that core product information like item and description, and identifying product or SKU number, cost and pricing, main selling attributes like color and size, etc., to include other aspects of product information now used in an e-commerce or omni-channel environment. This includes extended product information like technical features and specifications, web-only descriptive copy, warranty information, and so on. Layered on top of this are the extended hierarchy and relationship information needed in other channels, marketing and merchandising data needed for cross-sell and upselling, and operational data and attributes used to trigger business rules and actions on your selling site. You can't approach a PIM simply as a technical system or a technical solution. A successful and impactful PIM implementation includes strong data governance. There needs to be formal processes and policies in place to manage the data. Organizations have to buy in and understand the value of good, complete data and learn to treat this as an asset. The point I'm trying to make here is that a PIM implementation can't be successful without first examining the organization and its current processes and policies surrounding product management. For example, I worked with a company a couple of years ago where the product data they received came from many sources and even more methods of receiving that data, including anything from spreadsheets to Word documents to information contained within the body of an email. Needless to say, a lot of work still had to be done prior to getting that information into the PIM. So a PIM is definitely not a panacea for all that's wrong within an organization as it relates to sloppy product management. It's a solution that allows for stronger data governance, integrity, and visibility, and is most successful when thoughtful preparation is paid to the planning and process change that may need to occur within the organization prior to the implementation. There are a lot of benefits of implementing a PIM, and they're both directly and indirectly measurable. We're going to focus today on three broad categories, including the PIM taking on the role as the central repository and system of record for all product information, then the increase in structure and efficiency, which reduces the amount of labor needed to set up and manage products while also lowering the error rate, and lastly, the additional strategies that are enabled by implementing a PIM. So first and foremost, the PIM provides a single repository for storing all your outgoing product data. A central repository system of record gives a single view of the product data to the enterprise so everyone sees the same information. You're going to see data quality and consistency naturally improve by reducing the need to manage redundant information in multiple systems. There shouldn't be any discrepancies between systems because the product data is all coming from this single source. It also gives users greater visibility to all product data information in one place, which makes it easier to spot and fix missing or incorrect data. PIMs improve control and management of the product data through system-defined workflows, automated formatting of data, and auto-triggering of business rules and flags. This is going to make the setup and management of product data more efficient and reduce the potential for mistakes, and therefore, ultimately, it's going to result in a more consistent customer experience. So depending on your current processes and the state of your product data, the PIM implementation will require a fair amount of upfront legwork to configure and integrate correctly, but in the long run, it's going to significantly save you resources and time. The system-controlled workflows and automated business rules, triggers, and data formatting are going to reduce the number of manual processes and steps needed to create product data for both internal and external consumption. Streamlining the workflow makes it less likely that something gets missed in the process and makes it easier to monitor and manage the product setup in general. This, coupled with the reduction of manual processes, decreases the potential for process bottlenecks and is going to improve the time to market. These efficiencies allow your resources more bandwidth, which results in increased productivity with less labor and cost. A PIM offers the structure, efficiencies, and more sophisticated functionality that can open the door to new business opportunities that otherwise may not be effectively managed with manual processes. This can include international expansion capabilities such as managing multi-language, multi-currency, and multi-country regulations. It also allows for rapid assortment expansion or transition in time-sensitive markets. You see, managing hundreds of thousands of SKU additions or transitions weekly or even monthly can require more manpower than some companies can even afford to deploy. So a PIM has the power to make that task more achievable with less resources and more consistent data quality. PIM is also extremely effective in managing the product attributes and business rules needed for deploying multi-domain businesses and personalized marketing strategies. All of these strategies are much more difficult and for some might even be impossible to deploy without the support of a PIM.
So how do you know if a PIM's right for you? Many of the clients that we work with initially don't actually understand the capabilities or the benefits or the true power behind PIMs, so many aren't even sure they actually need one. Most businesses are used to making things work manually by throwing resources from merchandising, operations, and IT at a problem to try to cobble together a solution. And therefore, it isn't always obvious that a PIM solution is needed. Take a look at some of the questions we have listed here. If your business answers yes to the questions like those listed here, you would likely benefit by implementing a PIM solution. So once you've determined you need a PIM solution, many times the next challenge is building the business case to show that the benefits of a PIM implementation outweigh the risks and the costs associated with it. Many companies have a hard time building a business case for a PIM implementation because so many of the benefits and cost savings are either indirect or highly subjective. For instance, what value do you put on consistent, high quality and high quantity of product information on your e-commerce product pages? What's the value of providing that same product information to your customer service call center reps and your in-store sales associates? What value does your customer place on this information? Does your product information create customer loyalty because they trust you as an informational resource? Building a business case or estimating a return on investment for a PIM may be a slightly different approach for each company, but perhaps a good way to start building the case is to understand the cost of not having a PIM. Many merchants and industry experts estimate that companies without PIMs have data error rates between 15 and 30%, and those data errors can be costly. That number hasn't really gone down over the last 10 to 15 years, even though companies have identified it as a problem and have made efforts to try to correct it. So why is this? As channels integrate with multiple sales domains and supporting operational systems, things get trickier and more complex, leading to a rise in data errors and issues. Traditional legacy systems were just not designed to handle the vast amounts of data and complex data structures that business demands today. Many companies are leveraging manual or semi-manual processes like Excel spreadsheets and email communications to collect and produce product data, report changes, and manage product setup. It's no secret that these manual processes are more time-consuming, costly, and error-prone. Now, if you couple the system constraints with manual processes, companies simply aren't able to effectively manage the product data they have today. The time consumption, errors, and operational costs are diluting much more profit than most companies realize, and no matter how good or how well managed the legacy systems and manual processes may be, they won't be able to measure up to an automated solution like a PIM. So when building a business case for a PIM, think of what not having a PIM is costing your company. So our clients regularly ask what key performance indicators or performance metrics they can leverage to evaluate their current state and help them build their business case. There isn't a single KPI or set of KPIs that will work for every business scenario, but there are several that in some combination can usually tell a unique story for every business. Those KPIs can provide a baseline of the current state performance, which can be used to estimate the impact of a PIM, and then later can be used to prove the return on investment post-implementation. We've listed a few of those KPIs that have been helpful for our clients to evaluate. Just as an example, I worked with a client that managed a really large number of SKUs and had frequent SKU turnovers and transitions. Their product setup process was extremely manual, and they had a lot of challenges for managing images on their website product pages and also for their print media. For this client, they were able to build a business case around a single KPI, which was cost per product setup. The cost savings they estimated they could gain by streamlining the product setup and image management process was more than enough to justify the expense of the PIM solution that they were considering. Another client had identified that customers were complaining about a lack of product specs online. They also had high return rates, with customers citing things about the product like it didn't fit or it wasn't as described. They suspected they were losing sales and customers due to this particular product content issue. They knew they couldn't manage additional specs with the existing systems, and they had to consider a PIM. They built their business case by estimating impacts they felt they could have in improved return rates, traffic conversions, and average order value. At the end of the day, each business needs to evaluate several different KPIs to figure out the best approach to tell their own story and find the areas that will most likely be impacted by the implementation of a PIM. The best approach is to evaluate your current business performance with some common KPIs like the ones listed here. Look to the areas that may not be reaching performance expectation due to issues with product data or content. Also look at KPIs that with improvement will help you reach some of your long-term business goals. And then finally, try to estimate that improvement value of the KPI and translate those improvements into bottom line sales, cost, or margin dollars. Knowing you need a PIM is step one. Finding the right PIM solution to fit your business is the next step to tackle. The good news is there's a lot of different solutions out there with varying capabilities, varying implementation costs, as well as implementation timeframes. So there is an opportunity for all retailers and manufacturers to consider a solution that fits their needs as well as their budget. The key to finding the right PIM solution is first understanding your business's unique requirements and then finding a solution partner that can meet those needs. Not every solution will be right for every business, which is why it's important to perform the due diligence up front before selecting a business partner.
Along with the basic questions regarding system implementation like cost, time commitment, resource needs, implementation time frame, there are other questions to answer that are highly dependent on and specific to an organization for a lot of reasons. If there are other systems under consideration in parallel with a PIM implementation, these questions will also include sequencing and priority. So one of the first questions to consider is, when does a PIM take priority in implementing over other systems. This depends significantly on the systems and processes under consideration for change or enhancement, as well as the culture within the organization. But a PIM should be considered the foundation for and master repository of product information that feeds all of the systems that need or require product data. Because of this, when you're choosing between implementing another system, a PIM, it almost always makes more sense to implement the PIM solution as a precursor to other systems that will eventually integrate with it. Another question to consider is, can we implement a PIM at the same time as other systems? The easy answer is yes, but it has to be weighed against all initiatives in play, the culture's appetite for change, and even the perception of disruption. This question is similar to the question of priority, but forces you to think about the parallel activities, implementation timing, and planning for the project in general, while you're simultaneously taking into account other projects that are going on around the company. You should also ask yourselves, are there new systems that should be implemented before a PIM? Again, this is going to depend on the initiatives in play within the organization and priorities for change, but many times the answer will be no, or you'll come to the determination that the implementation should coincide. An example of this would be the implementation of an e-commerce front end and a PIM, which makes sense to implement and integrate together. So answering the preceding three questions can be very difficult, complex, and time-consuming, but it's such a critical step in any organization's effort to plan and map out a multi-system implementation or upgrade. As you can probably see, the benefits of this exercise extend much further than just answering the basic questions we posed. The real benefit is that it inevitably helps to kickstart the planning process as well as the thought process that's necessary to build the foundation for the project. This takes time and guidance, and an organization that underestimates the importance of this planning, or if you want to call it pre-planning process, will likely suffer downstream from that lack of proper planning and decision making. In our experience, we've worked with companies from the beginning of the process as well as coming in mid-project, and we have found that this step will be completed at some point in the project, and it's just not as effective when it's undertaken in the middle of the project after that lack of decision-making or planning becomes evident. So the key to resolving these questions lies in careful assessment and discovery of all systems, integrations, processes, and even policies that are currently in place. It's during this process that groups or departments within the company are going to express concerns, suggestions, and insights that aren't normally gleaned during the day-to-day activities of operating the company. Lastly, a question that's commonly asked is, do we need to clean our product data before implementing a PIM? This question is a little easier to answer, and it's almost always a resounding no. The reason for this is that too much time spent trying to standardize, compartmentalize, normalize, and otherwise clean the data can become wasted time down the road if these activities don't dovetail properly with the systems, the processes, and even the policies that have been developed during the planning and selection process. It's not to say that you shouldn't strive to understand the existing data structures, all systems of record, the integration and pathways prior to planning for this implementation. The process of mapping out data conversions, integrations, and data flows for the new system should be undertaken in parallel with the implementation and may initially evolve as processes and policies are created and the spectrum of product attributes, business rules, workflows, and triggers are all developed. It's at this time that strategies to clean or replace some of the existing data will begin to come into focus, and for this reason, it's best undertaken at this stage of the project. So in the interest of time, this may be a bit oversimplified, but you really need to ask yourself, how do we get started in order to identify any hurdles to success and to devise strategies to overcome them? While the following is not unique when considering a PIM, it is critical for a system like this because not every company needs a PIM, and many within the company may not be able to identify as well with a PIM when compared to something like an e-commerce front end, which is much more tangible. So to get started, at least at a high level, you want to assess the current state of your product data and the processes surrounding its management. Ask yourselves the questions posed earlier. Do I have high SKU counts and frequent transitions? Am I collecting product data from disparate sources? Do I have multiple manual processes in place to collect and store product data? What are my goals regarding fulfillment and delivery options? What are my expansion plans in general? If you haven't decided to implement a PIM yet, then this assessment is critical to making that decision. Take your time with this one and be honest with yourself. Once you decided that the organization needs a PIM, a good next step is to build a business model and plan. This will help to clarify the intent and benefits of implementing such a system, and it goes a long way to help in aligning the organization and gaining buy-in from key stakeholders. So you should start by defining an operating and business model for that PIM. You should identify gaps or expected changes in processes, define new roles and responsibilities for product data management, and identify, at least at a high level, the needed system integrations. The culmination of this exercise typically results in high-level requirements, which will guide the selection process, as well as a project roadmap defining what needs to be done to implement, and even expected timing. The requirements or design phase of the project will bring into focus the functionality needs of the company, the current state of your product data across multiple silos, attribute configuration needs, required workflows, business rules, and even a map of integrations needed to other systems. This is going to naturally define the degree of sophistication that's needed in a PIM and will help to create a short list of potential providers from which to choose. The final step, as in any project like this, is to implement the system, code the integrations, and operate. I won't go into too much detail on that. So that about wraps it up for the presentation. We'd like to end by highlighting what we said earlier regarding the PIM solutions that are out there and the fact that they are many and varied. As with other systems, functionality within a given PIM can be very sophisticated with an unlimited number of attributes. The ability to tie triggers and business rules to attributes, complex workflow, user security, and so on. That's not to say that every PIM solution should be looked at the same, and there are many that are much less sophisticated but also come at a much lower price tag. There truly is a PIM solution out there for every budget, which is why it is very important to dedicate the time up front to determine the functionality required for your organization so that the list of potential partners accurately reflects your needs. Mary, I'll throw it back to you now for the question and answer session, and I'd like to thank everyone who attended for your time and attention.
Great. Thanks so much, Steve, and also Heather. Definitely some really interesting information there and a lot of thoughts to mull over. I'm going to transition us into some Q&A, so if you have any questions for Heather, Stephen, or Rick, who's also on the line, please go ahead and throw those out using the chat box in the GoToWebinar extension.
Hey, Mary, this is Rick. Great presentation from Stephen and Heather. I really enjoyed it. It's not a side of our client's business that we often get directly involved with, and so I definitely learned a lot, and I appreciate it from you guys. I have a couple questions. In terms of the typical size of retailers that start considering a PIM solution, I know that you said that there's, in terms of cost, it can be all across the board, but is there a general like size of the company that usually starts to explore a PIM solution in terms of, just revenue for the size of their company?
Well, we've definitely seen companies that have a varied revenue stream. To be honest, it's not normally the revenue size of the company that determines whether or not they need a PIM or want a PIM. It's usually the number of SKUs or the complexity of the SKUs. So, for instance, a PIM is really helpful for someone, for instance, who's in, let's say, electronics, that has a lot of attributes that they're, trying to do personalized marketing for on their website, or that, they need to list out a lot of different specifications in order for customers to compare products and things of that nature. So, frankly, it's usually the SKU or the assortment makeup that determines the importance of a PIM.
Got it. So a few times you guys referred to high SKU counts, and retailers with larger SKU counts will start to, or they're a better option for PIM solutions. How do you define a high SKU count? Like what ballpark in terms of number of SKUs are you referring to?
Well, if you're only doing a few SKU transitions, a week or a month, and it can easily be handled by one person, and you feel like you've got good data quality and you've got the right amount of specifications online, then you probably need a PIM. It's the companies that are doing like hundreds of SKU turnovers weekly or monthly, and they're having problems managing all the data related to that. So we've worked with retailers that have, they start out with maybe 10,000 SKUs, and they're planning on growing to 100,000. We've worked with retailers, that maybe have 4,000 SKUs, but they're constantly transitioning and turning them over because they're high fashion or something of that nature. So if you only have 100 SKUs or a couple hundred SKUs, it's probably not going to be as beneficial, although there are some really inexpensive solutions out there that even make managing a lower SKU count sometimes beneficial.
Got it. That was really helpful. So it seems like it's just about the number of total SKUs and then the frequency in which you're involving new SKUs or selling out of existing SKUs, and so that turnover is a crucial factor there. And then I think you guys covered it a couple different times that there's like very low cost options. If you just have a couple hundred SKUs, there's mid-level, higher tier options. Could you just give us a ballpark of pricing and how the PIM solutions will typically approach pricing from like a low, medium to larger platform?
Sure. On the low end, you're talking about obviously less functionality, but you're able to manage product. You're able to even offer things like portals to vendors to be able to update the product information themselves. So there's some pretty good functionality. There's actually some out there where the implementation cost is free, and then they run on a revenue model, transaction model. So they a certain amount each month. Those are very low entry point for pricing, and then hey, if you make a lot of money, you pay them more. If you don't make as much, you don't pay as much. But there are PIMs out there, ultra sophisticated PIMs with all of the bells and whistles and the business rules and workflows, and those can go up to $500,000 to implement.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that's really helpful. And then my last question is just about the internal department for a retailer that typically owns the entire process of vetting the PIM solution, making the case. What department, I know that you guys kind of briefly covered it in the presentation, but what department typically owns like the vendor selection and the entire process of implementing a PIM solution?
Yeah, I know it sounds like a question with an easy answer. Unfortunately,
it just depends, huh?
Yeah, it does depend. I mean, I'll tell you a couple ways that they do it, though. Typically, it's merchandising buying that's going to own the sourcing of the product, getting the acquisition of the data. Obviously, there are other areas that are going to help out with that, like you might have a photography department that's doing all the photography for the product and putting those assets into the PIM. But then you also have to consider channel offerings and fulfillment offerings as well. So a relatively complex retail company that's got a couple of different channels they're offering sales through, maybe web and catalog and store, might have different buying organizations within the company, and so you've got a couple of different areas that are using the PIM, but they also have to dovetail with each other because all the product data is going to be the same. You also might have different fulfillment options, like you might use a 3PL for your fulfillment. You might have your own warehouse. You might do drop ship. And a lot of times when you've got a drop ship program, there might even be a separate group for that because the way that you acquire that product data is slightly different than the way that you would acquire it for a SKU that's being sold only through brick and mortar.
Got it. No, that totally makes sense, but I still think it's helpful kind of for each of the internal teams to understand the role that they could play with the initial implementation and then an ongoing role if they do get a PIM solution into place. And so, yeah, that's all the questions I have. I'll turn it back over to Mary.
Great, thanks, Rick. Definitely in line with some of the questions that our attendees are asking as well. Got a couple different questions, which I'm not sure, Stephen and Heather, how much information you do have on, just if there's a list of PIM vendors or a good place to start that research. do notice that you had that nice slide with several different ones mentioned. So.
Yeah, well, so the easy answer is, if you look at that slide, we've got most of the big players represented on that. You can also find some information usually from Forrester or the Gartner Quadrant. Usually both organizations are doing some type of research throughout the year where they compare different solutions and so on. The unfortunate thing is many times the solutions that show up on a Forrester report or a Gartner report are the really top tier guys because they're trying to vet the best solution out there. So to be honest, there's not one single place where you can find a complete list. I think a lot of the logos that we have represented on the slide that we have there represent a large majority of the options that are out there. So to be honest, the slide is probably one of the better resources to start the search.
Awesome. That's really helpful. I think people they're asking about SEO implementation and cleaning data and stuff, and I think that's going to depend on what your priorities are and your budget in terms of vetting a PIM. So that's super helpful. Kind of tying back into those initial questions, evaluating if a PIM is right for your store. A couple questions about SKU count and SKU changes. So could you kind of give a little more information about how to determine how often you're making those changes if a PIM is right for your store?
Sure. I mean, I guess the simple answer is if you're feeling like the bandwidth of the team that you have is really constrained with the number of SKUs that you're transitioning, then a PIM solution might make sense. Like I said, we've worked with folks that usually they've got several thousand SKUs that they're introducing either online or in multiple channels. Typically, folks that have only a couple hundred SKUs or less, for instance, 50 or 25 or something like that are, boutique shops, they don't typically find as much of a benefit from PIM. Although, like Steve mentioned, there are a couple of really, really cheap options that you can get into if you're looking for specific functionality, like you want to offer a supplier portal that suppliers can provide you information via a portal. Even if you only have 50 SKUs or 100 SKUs, there are some solutions that can make that affordable. But for the most part, if you're getting into the bigger PIM solutions and the bigger implementations, you're probably going to have a couple thousand SKUs that you're running at one time and transitioning them over multiple times a year.
Do you have a specific favorite for smaller merchants or larger merchants that you have had experience with in terms of a PIM solution?
It's hard to actually say that we have a favorite or not, because to be totally honest with you, it really depends on the retailer and the capabilities that we need, or that the retailer needs. We've worked with solutions that were great solutions, but unfortunately they didn't have the capabilities that the particular retailer wanted, so they weren't the right fit for the retailer. So I think that there's not an easy answer to that, but that's the whole point of sort of trying to understand exactly, generally speaking, why you think you need a PIM and why you want a PIM, and then finding 3 or 4 suppliers, PIM providers that can provide the specific capabilities that you're looking for. Because what's good for one retailer or manufacturer, frankly, might not be good for another person who has a totally different assortment set or complexity of assortment.
Plus, I mean, maybe sounding a little bit cagey, but we do try to be as system agnostic as we can. But even more important to us is the old adage that a system does not drive requirements. Requirements drive what a system will do. And what I mean by that is you really need to approach it the other way, which is, okay, yes, there are solutions that are out there, and they rank in this order in terms of their price, if you were just to look at that. But what you really want to do, and I mentioned it a little bit earlier in the presentation, is that process, that step of going through and actually really looking carefully at yourself, at your organization, interviewing the people within the organization that are responsible for product setup, finding the pain points, finding the gaps, and then starting to develop the requirements of how that system, whether you want to call it a PIM or even something homegrown, how that's going to help you to make things better. And if it starts to introduce things like automated workflows, I want to make sure that by person they have a specific workflow that they go through in order to set up a product and they can't deviate from that. Or I need hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of attributes, or I need my attributes to be able to tie to business rules and triggers. Once you start realizing that's what you need, that's going to drive the short list of solution providers. And then, of course, you know, there's always reality. You look at the price tag and you say, oh boy, this is not going to be possible given our budget. You have to rethink things. But we really feel strongly that you want to look at your requirements and then find a system for it versus the other way around.
Definitely good advice. Thank you there on that one. Just a quick reminder to everybody, I got a couple questions on that slide with specific solution providers. We will be sending you guys all a recording of the webinar, and the deck will be available, so don't worry about getting those. That will be made available to you shortly, so don't stress. Segueing into just a couple last questions because we are coming pretty quickly up on time. I had a question about PIMs and brick and mortar, and so this one's from Tyler. He wants to know, does it still make sense for retailers without brick and mortar stores to implement a PIM solution?
Yeah, actually, I mean, PIMs were originally designed to run e-commerce functionality because, you know, with e-commerce came the need for product copy, more specifications. You didn't need a lot of that information. Most people did not need that type of information if they just had a brick and mortar. So a PIM solution actually was created with the intent of serving the needs of e-commerce. And then over time, it's just started to evolve into be this central repository that is good not only for e-commerce, but also for brick and mortar, for catalog, etc., because it can house all of these like attributes that can at any point in time be pulled or referenced into different systems, you know, and with the inclusion of different types of digital capabilities in stores, it's become more important. But like I said, to be honest, PIMs originally were an e-commerce intended capability that's expanded its role.
Yeah, plus just to expand a little bit on that, the fact that you don't have brick and mortar means you don't have a traditional retail merchandising system. If you're an e-commerce pure play and you're starting out, you just don't have that. And that foundation, therefore, since it doesn't exist, is going to create a bit of a vacuum in terms of the systems that you're using on your e-commerce. And a lot of times what these companies will do is they'll try to find, well, what system do I have that I'm going to be able to use to manage my product data before they think about a PIM. And that almost always goes to the e-commerce front end. And most e-commerce front ends are very lightweight when it comes to that kind of product management, especially as it relates to any kind of product setup. They might be good at storing that information, but sometimes they've got just horrible interfaces, UIs to be able to set that data up. And so that's why it's really important to look at something like a PIM if you don't have retail brick and mortar. Now, if you do have retail brick and mortar stores, I think we covered this a little bit earlier, that's going to be that core of product information. And so the PIM really is supplemental part of that, and then can transform into the system of record for that and feed that retail merchandising system as well.
Definitely. That's super useful information. Got a couple questions about Amazon integration, so I'm not sure how much you guys know about that, but questions about Amazon storefront setups be an example of PIM or work with PIM integration. I don't know if that's something that you guys have prowess over or familiarity with.
Not a ton, but I mean the fact that you're going to sell on Amazon, you know, means that you've got your product information. you've got to integrate with them. There are going to be canned integrations to systems that you're using to be able to provide the product information to them, and those can be from PIMs. They can also be from other systems that you have that you're using. But it really it's too highly dependent on your particular situation and the state of your product data and how it's being managed. But there are integrations to some of the PIMs out there to be able to pass that information to them.
And I think the thing to add to that too is that if you have a PIM that you can use a PIM or you can leverage a PIM to help you control some of the things that are highly regulated in Amazon. So for instance, I know Amazon has a lot of rules and regulations about pricing and availability and shippability and things like that. So a PIM can allow you to have multiple facets that one could be for your personal website, and some different information can be fed to Amazon to meet whatever requirements or restrictions that they have with regard to your product. So I mean, that's a very general answer to the question, but they can be integrated. It just depends on what you're trying to use the integration for and how you would want that integration set up.
Gotcha. Awesome. I'm going to
also, Mary, I'm sorry to cut you off. Real quick, on the Amazon front, you obviously need to, as a retailer, have accurate, make sure that the pricing is updated and the inventory is updated. But from a content perspective, with Amazon, it's really dependent, or the importance of the content is very dependent on whether or not you are the page owner. And so on Amazon, if you are selling a product, you're a reseller and there's 29 other sellers of that product, oftentimes Amazon's not even going to use your content because the content on that page is already built out. If you have a unique ASIN or you own the page on your own, then Amazon will default to your content, and the importance of your title and your description and your search terms and your bullet points becomes a lot greater, because that's going to impact the conversion rate on that page. And so that's another consideration. If you're an Amazon seller and you're owning the page, you own the content on the page, then it's extremely important. If you are selling with 29 other sellers, then your content is not as big of a consideration. You just need to make sure that your inventory is up to date and accurate.
Yeah, good point, Rick. Thanks.
Definitely a good point. I'm going to scale back just a little bit and kind of go in line with sort of what Rick was just talking about, and so I think, Rick, this one might be a little bit more applicable to you. Just talking about e-commerce and retail as a whole in relation to product information. Karen wants to know, what is the best way to provide shoppers with the best information possible? And again, this one's a little bit open-ended.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about prioritization, and so you have to first kind of ask yourself, does your content matter to your customer? And so the way that I typically think about it is your product a commodity product or is it unique? And so on that spectrum, if you're selling toilet paper, for instance, for the most part, your customers are going to know which brands they like. The website experience or the content that you provide around the type of toilet paper is probably not as important as your price, and you're really competing on price because you're selling a commodity product. If you look to apparel, for instance, it's on the opposite end of the spectrum, where it's about the brand and it's about the experience that the retailer can create on their site, and that's actually why apparel has been a challenge for Amazon, because it's difficult to create that unique shopping experience on Amazon the same way that retailers can do on their own site. And so it really depends. And obviously every retailer wants to provide a custom experience. They want to have unique content. They would love to be able to dedicate hours and hours to building out the content for each individual SKU. But if it's not going to impact sales performance or conversion rates on your site, then it's difficult to justify that time investment. And so what I would recommend is, if you feel like you have unique products and building out the content and the product information for that individual product is something you want to test, maybe take your top 10 selling SKUs or your top 50 selling SKUs and invest time with your internal staff to build out the content for those SKUs and see if it makes a difference in terms of how the product is ranking on marketing channels like Google Shopping. See if it makes a difference on the conversion rates on your page, and if it does, then you can continue to prioritize the build out of those SKUs. If it doesn't, then that's kind of your customers telling you that all of the effort you're putting into building out the unique content isn't as relevant to them, and that's probably an indicator that the products you're selling are more of a commodity product.
Super helpful. I think it's such a good point. Testing is always going to really be elucidative of what is going to be effective for your online store and your retail store. So we're coming right about at the end now, so if you have any additional questions, I apologize, we're probably not going to be able to cover them all, but again, feel free to reach out to me, Mary at cpcstrategy.com, contact at cpcstrategy.com, or to Heather or Steve, and I'm sure that they will be happy to answer questions as well. And again, stay tuned for that webinar recording, which will be coming your way. I'm just going to hit up one last question, specifically to Heather. Heather, you mentioned earlier in the presentation specifically about basic product information in juxtaposition to how that's changing and what basic product information is now. Can you kind of elaborate on that a little bit, kind of what product information looked like previously and what it's evolved to for 2015?
Sure. I mean, I think the product information in general, you know, a few years ago was thought as very simple set of core attributes, if you will. So things like the SKU number, the product description, the price, selling attributes such as color or size. And it didn't necessarily go much farther than that. But now, especially with PIMs integrating with WMS systems and things of that nature, what constitutes as product data goes well beyond just those 10 or 15 core items, and you know, you start getting into things like product dimensions and weight, packaging dimensions and weight, you know, things like that weren't necessarily considered a major big deal to include in core merchandising systems or item masters. Now that information is being, you know, referenced quite a bit, and folks need information like that not only for WMS but for, you know, calculators and things that are calculating shipping on their websites and things of that nature. So, and then of course, you know, you've got the types of things that you need for e-commerce, things like copy and specifications and features. But it also goes beyond that as well, because you need attributing for faceting and searching online. You need additional keyword attributes and things of that nature. I mean, we have folks that like things like that, that, you know, people didn't think about that type of information as product information or core product information, but it's now becoming increasingly important in order to have the personalized experiences that customers are starting to expect, not just in e-commerce, but in all channels.
Awesome. Super helpful answer, so thank you there, Heather. We are just about out of time, so I'm just going to close this webinar up. Just as a friendly reminder, keep in mind we will be sending the webinar recording in your email, so keep an eye out for an email from us. And if you have any additional questions or we weren't able to cover your questions, feel free to reach out. Just want to say thank you so much to all of our presenters for their wisdom and their information and their transparency today. And thank you to everybody who tuned in.